and welcome to the Science, Medicine and Technology podcast, where we explore the transformative power of technology in today's digital world. I'm your host, Dr. Padmavati Roy, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for an extraordinary episode on a topic that is shaping the future of India, the role of enterprise architecture in shaping digital India. Digital India is not just a vision, but a reality that is steadily transforming our country's landscape. The backbone of these advancements lies in robust and scalable enterprise architecture. From smart cities to e governance, from digital healthcare to fintech innovations. But what exactly is enterprise architecture? How does it play a pivotal role in this digital revolution? Today, we have a special guest to help us explore these questions. Dr. Pallab Saha, General Manager at the Open Group India, is joining us. Dr. Saha is a distinguished expert in enterprise architecture and has guided numerous organizations and governments worldwide in their enterprise architecture and digital transformation journeys. In today's episode, Dr. Saha will share his insights and experiences on how strategic planning and IT infrastructure alignment with business goals drive efficiency, innovation, and accessibility across various sectors. We will discuss real world examples, best practices, and the challenges faced in this ambitious journey. I welcome Dr. Pallab Saha, General Manager at the Open Group India, who is responsible for the growth of the Open Group in India and the Asia Pac region. Thank you for tuning into the EMS and Technology podcast. Let us embark on this enlightening journey together with Dr. Pallab Saha. Dr. Saha, welcome to the podcast on enterprise architecture, which has shaped the digital India. So, over to
Thank
you,
you.
Dr. Saha.
Thank you, Dr. Padmavati. It's really a pleasure to be here on this podcast and share whatever knowledge and insights I've gained in terms of how enterprise architecture has enabled digital government in many countries. But today, we are here to speak about how enterprise architecture has furthered and advanced the Digital India program. Thank you again. I'm very happy to be here.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Saha. So, India's digital progression and technological advances have been significant, especially in the past decade or so. So, India's digital progression has been substantial and transformative, impacting the lives of citizens in various ways. And I can say, if an enterprise architecture which doesn't affect each and every human in a country, such architecture, I can think that which is not so useful. So, in this regard, from enabling financial inclusion in rural areas to revolutionizing how we make payments, India has carved a unique path in digital progression, making significant strides in various fields with innovative strategies. In the e-government sector, initiatives like Digital India, which is, as you are aware, a flagship program launched in 2015, have played a crucial role in India's digital progression. Especially, I'm really want to have more discussion in this podcast on India's Enterprise Architecture Program or EA program, which has played a major role in supporting Digital India initiatives. As many of you may be aware, INDEA or India's Enterprise Architecture played a pivotal role in shaping Digital India by standardizing and streamlining government processes, enhancing interoperability between various ecosystems, and promoting citizen centric services deliveries by fostering efficiency, transparency, and integration. INDEA supports the seamless communication and data exchange essential for connected digital ecosystem. This framework aligns with the Digital India initiatives, driving digital transformation and innovation across government operations, ultimately creating more accessible, user-friendly, and effective public services, which is I think, the goal of any enterprise architecture program. Dr. Saha, welcome. Many thanks for accepting my invitation to share your perspective on the role of EA or enterprise architecture in shaping digital India. Dr. Saha, over to you.
Yeah, thank you again. And if e-government as a whole, that is the use of technology enabled government services, is not new per se in India. We have been pursuing e-government programs for more than 40, 50 years. But the difference between what was happening previously and what is happening today after the formal launch of the Digital India program, as you said, in 2015, is that in the past we have been expending a lot of resources to automate our services. And I'm sure many people know of the humongous system, which is called the railway reservation system,
Mhm.
as an example, right? All of us
Yeah.
probably have traveled in trains in India, and we have seen the ticketing system, which has been in around for more than 30 years already. So those are the examples of automating existing services in some way. Now,
Mhm.
formally, whole of government approach to enterprise architecture or whole of government architecture in India started in the year 2015 when Andhra Pradesh became the first state in the country, so to speak, to actually have a whole of government enterprise architecture. And as you were, mentioning during the introduction, that program was originally called Andhra Pradesh State Enterprise Architecture, and then it was during the launch of it, it was rebranded as ePragati, and
Mhm.
it was deliberate. ePragati, is actually a meaningful word because it actually shows that we are looking at architecture as a way to progress the state. So
Mhm.
that was the first start of the enterprise architecture, whole of government enterprise architecture. And the then chief minister, who also happens to be the chief minister now, took the bold step of saying, let's have a statewide enterprise architecture. And that initiative, so to speak, went on for 2 years. And we had a lot of initiatives which were derived out of the architecture, which drove the entire tech enablement of the state. But one of the things that happens in the government is that whenever there is a change in the party that rules the state, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes some of these transformative initiatives tend to slow down, or they tend to be forgotten or discontinued, so on and so forth. Now, to some extent, that also happened. However, there was a realization, at a national level, that what Andhra Pradesh has done can be done at a national level because, as I said earlier, we have been doing e-government for multiple years, but there was a need to consolidate. There was a need to ensure that whatever technology is being used, right, it's being
Yeah.
actually, used to progress the state and drive the development agenda. So that was the trigger, if you will, to start the INDIA, which you mentioned during the introduction, the India Enterprise Architecture. And so at that point, this was in the year 2017, 2018, where the Ministry of Electronics and IT decided that we need to have a national framework before we start asking the ministries and the states to launch their architecture and take benefit of all of the structured approach of building IT systems, right? So that was the whole idea. So there was this framework which was developed, which you mentioned. Again, I will not repeat it. These documents are all public documents. So if we go to the ministry website, you can still download those documents and read it. Now,
Yeah.
I'll get into the journey of what happened. But one thing that India stands out, it is not that other countries have not done at this level, but where India stands out is because today at this point, India is the largest country by population, right?
Yeah.
1.4 to 1.43 billion people, right? And we know that we have a very complex governance structure. We follow a federated structure where the states have a lot of autonomy in doing what they intend to do. And that is also reflected in the fact that there are certain subjects that belong to the state. And the reason I say that is administratively, as an example, health is a state subject, education is a state subject, versus there are certain subjects that belong to the center, the central government. So that kind of administrative division between the central government and the state government builds in a lot of complexity. So first is obviously we are the largest country by population. Number two is we are a very complex country by governance, because we have multiple levels of government. So we have a central government, we have multiple state governments, we have some governments, even having at the district level, sometimes urban and rural level, right? And many
Yeah.
times what happens is these governments can belong to different political parties. And therefore, sometimes it becomes a big challenge for us to do a transformation which is countrywide, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And therefore it stands out, right? There are if you see the digital government architecture literature, there are many countries which show up as examples, because I have kind of lived and worked in Singapore for multiple years. So Singapore is one good example. Estonia stands out as another good example. However, the problem in these two jurisdictions, so to speak, is while they are good examples to learn from, they are small, right? They are not
Yeah.
very useful examples for India. I mean, India is so large that there are so many factors that need to be considered. And most of the obstacles and challenges, which we can discuss later on, right,
Yeah.
happen to be political, administrative, and operational. Technology is never a challenge, right? Yes,
Yeah.
there are people who will come and swear by some types of technology direction, but that you know an architecture project never fails or succeeds because of technology. Technology is just a
Absolutely.
side issue.
Yeah.
It's a side issue, right? I mean, when we were coming up with the framework, we just assumed that the technology will be available. Let's not worry about it. We have to worry about how to roll it out, how to ensure that it's linked up to the development agenda, so on and so forth. So that kind of gives you a little bit of insight into how it all got started. So at this point, I will stop and you know let's go ahead with the discussion, because it's a very interesting journey that we have covered in the past 5 6 years.
Absolutely, Dr. Saha. When you mentioned technology was never a problem or never will be a problem, we can figure that out later. But when it comes to people, process, and technology, I think when you are thinking about a country's enterprise architecture, it is always people and the process, because especially when there is processes are different. Uh, for a country like India, where you have a central and various states and the complexity and the population. So I was actually going through in the A 2.0, and I was actually inspired to learn the three architectural patterns of the architecture domain pattern at the Government of India, and also at the state architecture pattern, and the in the EA light architecture pattern. Why are these three different patterns? I think whatever you just discussed about the complexity, I think these three
Hmm.
will answer that question of which I had before. And what about, and it actually takes me a little bit deeper, and how about the interoperability between these three patterns, and how do different government projects or policies influence these three patterns?
Yeah, very, very interesting question, because as I said, this stems from the complexity of governance structure that we have. And one thing which I always advise architects is that when we come up with the architecture governance, right, which is one of the
Mhm.
key areas to make the architecture successful, it is important for us to understand the overall governance in the organization. Now, in this case, the organization is the government, right? But it
Yeah.
could also apply to the corporate sector. But so the architecture governance has to be in alignment with the overall governance of the organization. And let me give you an example. If
Mhm.
the country by nature is federated, by nature follows a distributed structure of governance, the architecture itself cannot come and say, I'm going to centralize everything. because
Absolutely.
culturally that country and that organization is not ready to accept centralization, and vice versa. If the country is very autocratic, we know that there are many countries in the world who are very autocratic, all the decisions are taken at the so-called central level, then the architecture governance cannot say you need to be federated, because culturally people will not accept it. So the
Yeah.
same thing here also, when you talk of these the patterns, right?
Yeah.
What we realized and how it works is, this is actually one way for us to partition the architecture, because as I mentioned, we developed the framework and then we were thinking how is the best way to roll it out and to implement this, right? It is all good to have a whole of government architecture, but for a country as big and as complex in India, uh, you have to still think of priorities. No
Yeah.
country will have the resources to take up the entire whole of government architecture in one go. It is not a
Yeah.
good thing to do, because that's a really big bang approach. And and given that we are dealing with government architecture, which means that the money that comes to kind of implement these programs and projects is public money, and governments by nature are risk averse, right? So they want success stories, they want slight success stories before you identify where you want to implement it. So coming back to the pattern, as I said, there are certain subjects which are state subjects and certain subjects which are central subjects. So what we
Yeah.
have decided is that at the central level, we will partition the architecture
Mm-hmm.
by priority sectors. When I say sectors, it could be the health sector, education sector, justice sector. It could be, defense. It could be, e-commerce, right? So there are different sectors that country have. So we have prioritized based on the sustainable development goals. So if you
Mm-hmm.
see the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, it identifies 17 goals and roughly 200 plus targets in each of these areas. And then based on that, there are certain priorities. And that's exactly what we did in India. And as you were alluding to during the introduction, our objective with India was to ensure that country, that is in this case India, actually benefits developmentally because of the architecture. It is not primarily to bring in new technology. The new
Yeah.
technology happens to be only an enabler, right? Nobody in the bureaucracy gets impressed if you go and say, I'm going to use AI, ML, remote process automation, all that stuff. This is great stuff, but how is it going to double the farmer's income is the question that will get back. How is it going to improve the quality of a patient experience who's coming into the healthcare system? How is it going to improve the quality of education? Those are the more fundamental questions to deal with. So when we looked at partitioning, so one way was we did a vertical partitioning, which is by sector. Now, if you know how it works, so when we identify, let's take health sector, when we identified
Mm-hmm.
health sector as a priority, now health, even though it's a state subject, there is a Ministry of Health which takes a central role. And then some of the programs and initiatives rolls down to the states and eventually to the districts, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's a vertical partitioning of the architecture. The horizontal partitioning of the architecture is certain examples where you do it only at the central level and certain aspects where you do it at the state level. So therefore, when I say the Andhra Pradesh State Enterprise Architecture or e-Pragati, that's an example of a state taking up all of its gamut in a whole of government architecture. Meghalaya has done the same. There are many other states who are doing the same. So fundamentally, these are the primary patterns that we identified. And the reason is because ministries fundamentally or sectors are similar. So if health
Mm-hmm.
can do it, I can replicate a lot of those learnings into another domain or department. For instance, it could be education, it could be justice, it could be commerce and industries, it could be transportation. So that's a pattern, right? So that's one
Yeah.
pattern. The other pattern is, if Andhra Pradesh can do it, if Meghalaya can do it, if Maharashtra can do it, if Haryana can do it, why not Punjab? Because states are
Yeah.
very similar. That's another pattern. So these are the two layers of patterns that we created, and that's what you were mentioning earlier.
Thanks, Dr. Sahab. It's very discussion is going in a very interesting uh, mode it has taken. So, can you discuss the priority sectors for the India enterprise architecture and share more details about what are these priority sectors and what are the maybe I can if I can ask, 4 or 5 priority areas for the development that we have actually prioritized them.
Yeah. So again, continuing on from what I mentioned earlier, so the priority sectors are based on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So for India and pretty much
Mm-hmm.
every country in the world, the priority sectors would still be health,
Mm-hmm.
agriculture. Obviously, agriculture is important for India, but again, it will differ from country to an extent because, as I said, I mentioned Singapore previously, right? Now,
Yeah.
agriculture will not be a priority for Singapore. Singapore
Mm.
has no agriculture, right?
Yeah.
Unlike India, right? So therefore, I'm saying this is where the difference occurs. So the priorities identified for India, initial priorities are health, agriculture, education, commerce and industries, and smart
Okay.
cities, right? So this is how it goes. And the reason is why, because this these sectors deliver services, they deliver schemes that directly touches the people. And one
Yes.
of the things that we are trying to achieve through the enterprise architecture is to improve the ease of living for citizens, so health, education, agriculture, and ease of business for organizations, for corporates. This is where comes in the commerce and industries and smart cities, because cities happen to be the forebearers of economic and commerce, right? So that's where the
Yeah.
ease of business comes in. So these are the two, I would say, goals that we are trying to achieve through the enterprise architecture. Number one, ease of living for people, and number two, ease of business for corporates. Obviously, there is a third goal, which is also ease of governance. And the reason why I say that is because we are also trying to make governance itself, which means the whole act of governing the country, easier on the government staff. It should be easy to deliver a service, right?
Yeah.
It should be easy to share information. It should be easy to exchange data. So there is an internal ease of governance, and the two other goals are, as I said, ease of living and ease of doing business.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So when you mentioned we federated architecture in India, so can you throw some light on some of these important principles of India 2.0, where we have that modularity, the openness in design,
Hmm.
interoperability, and a federated architecture, and mainly security. And now, when you also mentioned our priority areas like healthcare,
Hmm.
cybersecurity, and security threats are more in these areas, and also finance, banking. Um, how are we managing these areas, and um, what is the privacy by design, and also the governance talks about?
Yeah. So when we, so as you mentioned, the India ecosystem architecture
Yeah.
takes the India to the next level, where government itself has started rolling out and governing, if you will, certain public digital platforms. A good example of a public digital platform would be, let's say, Aadhaar, right?
Mhm.
It could be Covin. Covin is for the vaccination. I'm sure many people
Yeah.
who have been vaccinated for the pandemic in India are aware of that, because you've got your certificates with the QR code. You also have DigiYatra. That's a platform, because DigiYatra is a service where your face becomes your ID as you check into the airport, right? So those are
Yeah.
examples of platforms, public digital platform. So what we have tried to kind of put in the version 2.0 is I wouldn't say allow, but enable states to build ecosystems. And the
Hmm.
reason why I say that is, when we analyze the services that the government provides, we realize that it's entirely possible that certain aspects of the services can be provided by parties other than the government. It could be provided also more efficiently by a private player. As an
Hmm.
example, let's say I want to provide a payment service. It is not necessary that all of the payment services and all of the services that require a payment capability has to be completely provided by the government, as long as the common specifications are available. As an example, in this case would be UPI, right? Anybody can write those capabilities and say, okay, based on the UPI specification, I'm going to provide certain payment services. So what we were trying to do through this public digital platforms is to enable the private sector to provide services and allow the platform players or the platform owners, so to speak, to combine these services to provide new capabilities. So I can have a payment service and I say, okay, I'm going to pay my property tax. The actual act of paying the tax can go through a hoop which is
Mhm.
not performed by the government, but as long as the payment is made and the bank provides saying that yes, the payment has been received, the service can be completed. So that's the whole idea of creating a digital ecosystem in the entire country. And the reason we did this is because we wanted the architecture to encourage the digital economy. Today,
Mm.
you must have heard of something called ONDC, right?
Yeah.
Open Network for Digital Commerce. That is an example of you having common standards to enable digital commerce. Today, if you see the digital commerce player, right? We all know who are the big players, right? They do not interoperate. Today, I cannot place an order with one commerce provider, digital commerce provider, and receive that same package delivered by another commerce provider, unlike what happens in the postal service. Today, if
Mm.
you send a letter, and it was true even 100 years back, if you send a letter from India to UK, for instance, India Post picks up your letter and it goes through the whole channel, and the British Post delivers that letter. Why?
Mm.
Because internally they interoperate in a manual way. But today you cannot do that in a digital commerce. I cannot place order on Amazon and receive the item on Flipkart. It has
Yeah.
to be
True.
Amazon on both sides,
Yeah.
right? Think
Yeah.
of it that way, right? It has to be Amazon or Flipkart on both sides. Same thing with many other services, right? So what happens is the merchants and the customers get tied to one platform, and that is exactly what ecosystems are trying to, I would say, remove, so to speak, because it opens up the entire platform to competition. Whoever is more efficient, you come in and provide the service.
So in that way, we are actually promoting and also encouraging the startups and all these various platform players as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, India is creating many platforms, and many of these are very successful, in fact. And
Mm.
obviously, as I said, this is a journey in progress. Over the next 2, 3, 4 years, you will see more platform players coming up, and sometimes these platforms are being kind of managed, so to speak, by the government, so that it becomes affordable by common people, and it, as I said, coming back, improving the overall quality of living.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's that's actually the goal. And
Hmm.
how do you think the enterprise architecture today is helping in integrating various digital initiatives across different government departments and public services?
So at many levels, when we talk of interoperability, you did allude to that word interoperability. We just don't mean interoperability as in between making two technical systems work with one another or
Mm.
interoperate with
True.
one another. That's one level of interoperability, right?
Mm.
When we talk
Mm.
of interoperability, it is interoperability at the level of business process, business services. So it could be a health service which requires payment. So that goes to the something which is provided by the Ministry of Finance or by a bank and then comes back to the health department. So that's one level. Second level of interoperability is data. So there are common data standards which is mandated by the architecture so that data can be exchanged by different ministries. So that's the reason why you're seeing many of these platforms interoperate. So today you could, for instance, have DigiLocker, where you
Mm.
keep all your certificates, digital certificates, and these certificates can come from completely different departments. You could have your passport, which comes from external affairs. You could have your driving license, which comes from Ministry of Transportation. You could have your mark sheet, which comes from CBSE or ICSC, right? Different
Yeah.
departments, different domains, different sectors, but they are all put together because the common data standard is being used. Now, is
Yeah.
it easy to do for us? No, it is still journey in progress. I'm sure over the next, as I said, 2, 3, 4 years, things will improve.
Yeah.
The third level of interoperability is between applications. So we identify common reusable building blocks. So
Mm.
our building blocks would be, let me give you an example. It could be Aadhaar because that's a digital identity. It could
Yeah.
be DigiLocker because DigiLocker provides an archival facility. It could be e-office, that's a workflow mechanism. It could be
Mm.
DigiYatra because that's a face identity, right? So that's another one. So there are these many of these, common or reusable building blocks. Coming back to the earlier point of modularity, where we actually encourage states to say, hey, if you need this capability, look at the library of services that is already available, see what interfaces are exposed, and use them instead of building or reinventing the wheel again. And that is now propagated through the entire country, through ministries and through states. That's the reason why many of the service today use these reusable building blocks. They are like fundamental or foundational capabilities that could be used across sectors. So that's what we are trying to achieve through this enterprise architecture.
Wonderful, Dr. Saha. So, I think like India's digital transformation are establishing an enterprise architecture at the central and various state levels. Can we now think that India is maybe third or fourth with respect to the digital transformation after US and Japan and Singapore and other countries?
If you go by the World Bank rankings, we were in the top 10, if I remember correctly, in the 2023 rankings for digital
Mm-hmm,
transformation, or I would say architecture driven digital transformation. We were ranked number 7 in the world.
mm-hmm,
And the countries above India were all small countries. So if you factor in the size and complexity, we are well
mm-hmm.
within the top 3.
Yeah, that's what.
See, because there is no comparison between India and a Singapore, India as an Estonia. They are
Yeah.
great, no problems, good thing, good examples for from obviously it's their perspective, it works for them. But there is no comparison between these two humongously different countries or jurisdictions. So without any doubt, today, if you look at architecture driven transformation, we are definitely within the top 5, if not within the top 3. Absolutely, because the kind of complexities that we are looking at, we are right among there within the G20, within the top 3, top 5 in the world, because the way we have used technology in a very frugal way, right? I think that's important for us to understand, and so innovative. Now, you know, pandemic is an example. There was a
Yeah.
time when you could travel with your COVID certificate with a QR code, and some of the developed countries wouldn't accept that certificate. That's because they did not have the QR code reader. They would
Yeah.
still give you that handwritten card saying that the person has taken a vaccination on this date, blah, blah, blah. And our first vaccination within 2 weeks was an automated system. And the reason is because we had the building blocks in place. We had to put it together and really come up with that example. So again, long answer, but short answer is we are way above in terms of, in terms of how we have used technology to enable transformation in the country. I mean, payment is a revolution. You go to any country, it's hard to see any vendor, be it very small, even the person who's sitting by the road selling coconuts, for instance, has a QR
Yes.
code. It is
Yeah.
just unbelievable. It is unbelievable. And this is killing the credit and debit cards, by the way. The entire payment has been revolutionized.
Absolutely. And many people, it's on the side line of this discussion. Many non-resident Indians who just came back to India, they are really surprised to see. They were thinking that they have to still carry money,
Oh,
but they took
no,
really a surprise.
not at all.
Uh,
Not at all.
not anymore,
No,
because
you don't
I
you
know.
don't need a physical wallet. Your phone is your wallet. That's it.
Tony, that's what it has actually all the complexities of carrying a bag, purse,
Yeah.
everything is gone now. And with that, I can say first industrial revolution was maybe started in Great Britain, but I think the actual digital revolution or payments through mobile, India is actually is leading that in the 20th century, when especially the significant initiatives like Digital India and widespread adoption of the national identity cards like Aadhaar and UPI payments. And all these are the landmark achievements in this digital transformation journey. And also, Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, yes, because today it is called Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission. It was originally called National Digital Health Mission, and
Mm-hmm.
that is an example of a sectoral architecture, which I mentioned previously, right? We identified
Mm.
the priority sectors. So health was
Yeah.
identified as a sector,
Yes.
and the Ministry of Health was roped in. And then we came up with this sectoral architecture, which is the National Digital Health Mission, now called the Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission, right? So here
Yeah.
we have identified priority sectors, health being the priority sectors. Within that sectors, many of the services were identified. And the challenge there is many times what happens, um, health data, given that it's a state subject, when I say health data, it could be
Yeah.
data about people, patients. It could be data about the facilities, which is primary health centers, secondary health centers, hospitals, specialty centers, so on and so forth, right? It could be data about doctors. It could be data about nurses. They primarily reside either in the state or within the facility,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yes.
fundamentally that's how it has been. And again, going back to my original comment on governance, right? So when we came up with the architecture, so to speak, the architecture specification, so one of the challenges that we had to contend is how do we bring all of this data from the states and the union territories into the central level so that we could actually provide a whole of government experience. So which means that if you see your, again, going back to the COVID certificate, if you see your COVID certificate, it has a 13-digit ID, right? That
Mhm.
is your perpetual health ID. That's an outcome of the National Digital Health Mission. So when we identified that data is the oil, so to speak, for the healthcare sector, we had to contend with the fact that at the central level, we will only use data for reference. The
Mhm.
actual data will continue to reside with the state governments and the facilities because sharing data is not a technical challenge, it is a political challenge. And
Yeah.
again, the reason I highlight this is because architects tend to be technically adept, they tend to be technically very capable, but they do not realize a whole of enterprise or a whole of government architecture has several political challenges. You have to learn to navigate the politics, and therefore your
Yeah.
governance, your architecture specification needs to be factoring that in before you come up with a specification and roll out the architecture. Now, one thing people ask me is that if you want to roll out something, is it good to do a pilot project or a proof of concept? I
Mhm.
typically say yes, you could do a pilot or a proof of concept, but one way to do national level transformational projects in countries that are as complex and as large as India is you have to roll out so fast that
Yeah.
it cannot be undone. See, this
Yes,
is
absolutely.
important because what happens in India, there is something called, and we have just faced that, there is something called elections. And
Hmm.
after
Yeah.
an election, if there is a change in government, there is always a danger, as I mentioned previously, some of the initiatives will be discontinued for various reasons, right? I'll not get into the political
Yeah.
part of it. But
Absolutely.
but if you roll out your project, like a like a carpet bombing, as they call it in the military, like complete national rollout, the
Hmm.
next political party who is coming in power cannot undo it. It is just so big that it cannot be undone.
Yeah.
I think this is something that architects have to understand. Don't take a POC, district by district, state by state, division by division. You are not going to succeed because somebody will come into power, somebody new will come into power and say, no, I don't like this because for whatever reasons, let's discontinue it. If you roll it out at a national level, a big bang approach, it
Yeah.
works well and it stays.
Yeah, absolutely. Big Bang approach, as you rightly mentioned, and also, uh, irrespective of the politics,
Hmm.
architecture is above everything, I can say, because we are building a modern India and digital India. For that, politics should support this vision, but not act as an adversary. And you are right. If you go a big bang, you can actually implement by the time the next government comes,
Yes.
and they have to just follow. So that's wonderful. And that actually what we have achieved so far through the IND EA, I think the COVID-19 pandemic is actually not so good, which happened in the last century, but as a blessing in disguise, which has helped India and many other countries, especially India, helped in the digitalization of India more, because we are able to see this uh, Paytm and online payments more using the mobile and all since the COVID, right? Because other countries are struggling to go to market and just get uh, the things through their mobile, but we are already are having. We today we you go to a vegetable vendor, you can just pay, we scan and then pay the, and that's what. So do you agree that pandemic worked for India as a blessing in disguise?
Yes, I mean, the pandemic, no one anticipated the pandemic because I remember a few years back, I was in Singapore, and that time East Asia had this whole idea or the other pandemic of the bird flu, right? But bird
Yes.
flu was never I would say a global pandemic. I mean, in East Asia there were some restrictions, so to be honest, personally, I thought that's what this COVID pandemic would be, but it turned out to be more than 1,000 times bigger than that. But
Yeah.
yes, if you ask me globally, pandemic has provided an opportunity. That's why they say, right, in every adversity, there is also a hidden opportunity. It is for the
Yeah.
countries how ready they are to take, advantage of that opportunity. So in India, we were ready, and given that we are a large country, coming back to the same point again, we had to continue functioning. And you just mentioned payments, right? Payments is an obvious beneficiary of this. But I'll tell you, the pandemic also changed the mindset of government officers. There was a time when, if you wanted to interact with a government officer, you had to show up physically. You
Yeah.
had to go to their offices or conference rooms and talk to them. But the pandemic actually said, let's have an online remote meeting. It changed the mindset of the governance. That's the big
Absolutely.
thing. Payment, see, the efficiency in payment is just a consequence. You will
Yeah.
see that it's a minor consequence, because today I could easily have a meeting with a very senior bureaucrat in the government, and he or she, unless it's a major decision making kind of meeting, is just a progress update, they are very comfortable having a remote meeting.
Absolutely. And all.
And that
Yeah.
changed the entire thing. You just become more productive. You don't have to travel, because anyway, during pandemic there were very few flights. So that's an example of how India changed. It changed our mindsets
Yeah.
towards technology. Technology
Absolutely.
enabled our living, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when I say our, I don't mean people, well-to-do people who are sitting in the urban areas. Even people in the rural areas, even people in the districts, they realized how remotely work can be done. Especially some of the activities definitely can be done. I fully understand that there are certain industries where remote work does not make sense. So for instance, if you're doing manufacturing or construction, you still have to show up at the construction site, but some of
Yeah.
these services can be delivered remotely, and therefore people became a lot more accepting of digital services and digital transformation.
Absolutely. And also not only the payments side, but also healthcare sector, where the pandemic had shown the telemedicine opportunities, especially in India. And
Absolutely.
there were studies where people fell ill very less. Maybe the
Hmm.
seasonal ailments and all, people have not gone out much. And also many people just want to visit and do some investigation, that kind of maybe non-essential medical
Hmm.
consultations also reduced. That's what they say. So again, coming back to, can you discuss India enterprise architecture model? I'm just curious, what is the difference between the togaf, what we have at the open group, and how do you customize or change to suit our country's architecture? Can you discuss a little bit about that?
Yeah. So TOGAF, I mean, coming from Open Group, obviously, I'm kind of deeply familiar with TOGAF, but TOGAF fundamentally, if you know, it is a completely sector agnostic, vendor agnostic, generic
Mm.
framework. It has the four domains, so to speak,
Yeah.
of architecture, which is the usual business, data, application, and technology, right?
Yeah.
And in some cases, organizations think or they decide that they could, I would say, implicitly have security distributed across these four layers, the BDAT. That's one way.
Yeah.
Another way is they separately have a security architecture domain which touches all of these. So that is fundamentally what TOGAF is. Now, if you see the entire TOGAF framework and all of the body of knowledge that TOGAF provides, it is technically applicable to any domain, any industry. Now, what we did is when we were developing the NDA, there are few things that we had to factor in. Number one was it was to be, obviously it's to be suited to India. That's one, number one. Number two is it's to be suited in the government sector because we are looking
Mm-hmm.
at a public service, public sector. So it needs to be tailored and configured to suit the government sector. And number three is it should be able to support, because when you talk of enterprise at a government level, as I said previously, especially in India, it's a multi-level enterprise, right? There is a central
Yeah.
government, which is an organization. There are state governments, which is an organization. You could
Yeah.
have a municipality, which is also an organization. You could have a district government, which is also an organization. And services are typically straggling across these four layers. So these are the three, four factors we had to take into consideration when
Mm-hmm.
we came up with the NDA, which is derived from
Mm-hmm.
the TOGAF. So in NDA, the other extensions that we did was I mentioned the sustainable development goals. So
Yeah.
what we did was we created the performance layer, which was derived from the goals and targets of the SDG. Then we
Mm-hmm.
do have the business layer, we have the data layer, we have the application, technology, and infrastructure layer. We had a separate security layer and a integration layer. Because we are looking at a federated government, which we discussed previously
Yeah.
across ministries and states, one of the key requirements for us to have a whole of government feel is that all of these services and different entities who deliver services need to be integrated all the way from business to data to application to technology. So we have an integration layer. And finally, the eighth one is the governance layer. And as I mentioned previously, the architecture governance in India aligns to the administrative governance that India follows. And I gave you some
Mm-hmm.
examples towards that. So that's how we have tailored TOGAF, extended
Mm-hmm.
a few areas to suit India's requirements and therefore created the India Enterprise Architecture Framework.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for that. And what are the main challenges um, organizations are facing when implementing NDA, especially in a diverse and populous country like India?
Hmm. Uh, in my view, the first challenge that we face, again, as I said, it's not technology, but definitely capability within the governments. So,
Mm-hmm.
and when I say capability, I mean as a whole in India, there are certain capabilities which understand architecture, especially in the central level, which means in the ministries, there are people who understand the value of architecture and they undertake these projects. However, when you go down to the state governments and go down even further to the district, urban, and rural governments, there is a capability gap. There are very few resources who actually understand the value and impact architecture can bring. So that is the biggest challenge that I face, right? So therefore, there is a lot of effort on creating awareness, on creating advocacy across the states, across the governments for them to understand how architecture can help them automate the services and actually coming back to the three goals, right? Ease of living,
Mm-hmm.
ease of doing business, and ease of governance.
Yeah.
Effectively achieve these three goals. So that is the biggest challenge. Uh, there are other challenges which I would say it could be operational challenges. Sometimes it is not easy to coordinate across states and ministries for various reasons, but I would say they are secondary reasons. The primary challenge happens to be capability gaps within the government to understand why architecture is important and what it can do for their states and respective jurisdictions.
So, how do you effectively address these capability gaps?
Uh, there are many ways and many things have been done. So during the introduction, you mentioned Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration. So this is where the IAS officers, the civil servants go for their training, right? So
Mm,
what we do is right from their foundational training to the mid-career training, there are modules which tell them, these administrative officers tell them, I mean, they are told about the value of architecture. So that's a capacity building. Then there
mhm,
are formal training programs. Then we identify priority states and sectors. So there are ministries. So the nodal agency driving this is National E-Government Division. So they take up projects across the ministries, across states, supported by the respective ministry heads and the state heads to do projects. We create case studies, so we kind of strengthen the body of knowledge. So it is an ongoing journey, but this is how we
mm.
try and address the capability gaps.
Thanks for that. And when we look into the future of enterprise architecture in India, what trends do you see emerging in the field of EA over the next decade or so?
Yeah. So first is I can definitely anticipate and envisage that our platforms will become bigger and
Mm,
they will cover more and more sectors, more and more services. We spoke about some platforms earlier. I'm sure other platforms. So for instance, one of the other platform which is coming out in the supply chain and transportation sector is the Gati
mhm.
Shakti, right? Which
Oh,
combines Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of Railways, road, rail, ship, port, everything come together because the entire supply chain is covered. So these platforms will get rolled out over the next 5 to 7 years. Use of new technologies, we are trying to explore how AI can help in some of these capabilities because sometimes, as we understand that some of these services can be easily automated and better services can be provided. Third change that we will start seeing is governments providing proactive services. As an example, is that in many cases, in many states in India, what happens is citizens still have to apply for a service, which
yeah,
means that, let's say, if you need your voter ID card, I still need to go to place. There is an online application. You apply for the voter ID card, but technically, government has all the information to actually give you a voter ID card. Even
yeah,
so, as you turn 18, the system knows when you turn 18. You could easily get an SMS saying that, is this your constituency? This is your voter ID card. Congratulations. This is what we give it to you. So those
mm,
proactive services are going to become more and more prevalent. So in a nutshell, this is how things I envisage. And obviously, there could be more states which will take up. There could be more ministries and sectors which will take up architecture, and you'll start seeing a lot of integration taking place between these ministries because coming back to the important point and what I mentioned earlier, because that's how the SDGs are designed. The SDGs force the ministries and sectors to collaborate. So, for
yeah,
instance, as an example, there are certain health goals within the health sector that is linked to quality of food. So, if you don't eat well, you cannot have good health. So,
absolutely. Mm,
it's fundamental, and some of this is very common sense, right? So if you eat good food, good quality food, your health will remain good. However, food is a Ministry of Agriculture concern, outcome is a Ministry of Health concern, but the goal doesn't see that. It requires
yeah.
these two ministries to collaborate. So I'm going to see more and more collaboration between different ministries and dealing with the complexities.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's wonderful. And can you share what do you see, like how what is the role of the Open Group India in influencing the public sector and especially education? When I say education, what is the role that the Open Group India playing in educating the enterprises, not necessarily only government, but
Hmm.
public and other education in the sense universities and engineering colleges, so on and so forth.
Good point. One of the things that we want to achieve in Open Group, especially from an India perspective, is that we want to improve the overall capability of architecture, across the country, not necessarily in the government. Obviously,
Yeah.
as I said, the government part is already happening, and I'm sure that's going to become even more pronounced in the next few months and next few years. But at a broader level, the way we try and influence organizations and educational institutions is, for instance, it's all good to have a framework, but as I always maintain, and I as well talk with many of the connects in the industry, is that we need to improve the body of knowledge by way of case studies. It's
Yeah.
important to have frameworks are great, guides are great, white papers are great. We need case studies, right? Real case studies, because case studies are what provides use cases in real settings. These are not fictitious things, the largest bank in the world and the second largest tourism company in the world kind of examples. No, real organizations who have done enterprise architecture, and very importantly, how they have addressed the challenges. So we identify encouraging case studies. The second is we recognize good implementations through the India Awards. So we have the Open Group India Awards, right? And we are going to be
Mm.
discussing that during presenting the awards during our conference coming up in 10 days. So it starts on July 29th in New
Mhm.
Delhi, where we are going to recognize and reward good implementations of architecture. Third is we are also encouraging universities and academic institutions to teach enterprise architecture as a subject, both at an undergraduate and also at a postgraduate level. So, which means colleges who teach BE and BTech programs and MBA
Mm.
programs, because we believe these are the two foundational cohorts of students who, when they graduate, if not even if they are not, you see, I don't expect a 22, 23-year-old to be an expert enterprise architect, but
Yeah.
on graduation, I would definitely expect him or her to be familiar with the overall structure of what a framework is, vocabulary, how to put it to use, so that over time, he or she becomes a better architect. So we are trying to kind of address right at the foundational level. And over the next 2 to 3 years, you're going to see a lot more initiatives. We have just started some of these programs. And in fact, I would like to invite all of your listeners, so to speak, to look at the conference website. So if you go to our Open Group website, you will see the India conference, and we have some wonderful speakers there. As I said, we are also going to reward our good case studies. Plus, also we have some sessions covering how architecture is going to be rolled out as a subject in academic institutions.
That's very impressive, Dr. Saha. And you are right. We need to start at the undergrad and graduate level, especially the engineering or the MBAs. They should understand
Yeah.
what exactly an enterprise architecture and the terminologies and so on and so forth. So, what is your advice to people who want to pursue a career in enterprise architecture? Why this question? I think I heard from one of your talks that there is a demand for the enterprise architects is growing across the world, and there are less number of enterprise architects we are having today. So, what are the opportunities in the government and private sectors in the coming years?
So absolutely. I mean, there are several, I would say studies done by very credible institutions. In fact, there is a 2022 paper in the Harvard Business Review, which talks of MBA curriculums, the modernization of MBA curriculums, and one of the areas where it needs to be modernized is that MBA need to be taught enterprise architecture, right?
Mhm.
So that paper is publicly available. I'm sure many of your listeners can actually download it and understand. So that's one thing. There are many other entities like Gartners and the Foresters who also talk about how enterprise architecture gives you a fulfilling career. It is a well-paid career. There are clear career paths for people who want to come into this and pursue this, yeah, from a long-term career perspective. So this is what I think from my advice. Now, I would obviously at this point there are not too many formal education programs in India, for instance, where you can study enterprise architecture at a university or a formal academic institution. So which means that you'll have to do with, let's say, for professional certifications like TOGAF, or senior architects may even go for our practice-based certifications, which is the Open CA, so on and so forth. So that's one part of it. But eventually, I can envisage, coming back to your previous question as well, I can envisage that in the next 3 to 5 years, we will have multiple universities and academic institutions offering this as a formal subject in their BTech and MBA programs. And therefore, that should spur the interest in a younger cohort to pursue architecture as a career and actually do well for themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a very good vision for the future as well. And we hope and wish that this will come true in very short time or maybe 1 or 2 years. Many thanks, Dr. Saha. That brings us to the end of this podcast. But before we conclude, I would like to ask you, how can our listeners learn more about the Open Group India and get involved in the enterprise architecture initiatives?
I would say the best way for us, for any listener, is to understand and go to our website, which is the opengroup.org website. And then, I have an entire team supporting me in many of these initiatives. Just reach out to us. Obviously, member organizations already know, for instance, how to get in touch with us. Non-member organizations, just reach out to us through our websites. The emails and contact numbers are provided, and we'll be happy to be in touch with you.
Excellent, Dr. Saha, and many thanks. And this podcast really, I think all the listeners will listen and get benefited, know more about what is the India Enterprise Architecture Program, how it has shaped digital India, and how one can learn more about enterprise architecture and also the Open Group India initiatives. And Dr. Saha, I have no words to thank you. This has been really a very good podcast with a lot of discussion and and also a lot of good information you shared with me and all the listeners. Thanks a lot, Dr. Saha.
Thank you very much, Dr. Padmavati. It was my pleasure to share my thoughts here, and I look forward to continued interaction and collaboration with you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks. Thanks a lot, Dr. Saha.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Have a good day. Yeah. Bye-bye.
You